Before we begin, take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Stories like this deserve to be remembered, not rushed. For a brief moment, the world thought it had witnessed a simple fairy tale. One woman walked onto a stage, sang a song, and changed her life forever. But real life is never that clean. What happened that night was not just a breakthrough performance. It was a mirror held up to society, revealing how quickly people judge, dismiss, and underestimate others. Susan Boyle didn't just surprise an audience. She confronted decades of quiet cruelty with a single voice. That night created a global sensation, but it also opened a door to a world she was never prepared to enter. Fame didn't arrive gently. It came like a storm, loud and uncontrollable. And while millions celebrated what they saw on stage, very few understood what Susan had already endured before that moment, or what she would continue to face long after the applause faded. When Susan Boyle stepped onto the Britain's Got Talent stage in 2009, she was already carrying a lifetime of being overlooked. At 47 years old, she didn't fit the image people expected from a star. Her appearance, her confidence, even her accent triggered instant assumptions. The laughter in the audience wasn't scripted. It was instinctive. Years of social conditioning surfaced in seconds. Even the judges struggled to hide their doubt. This wasn't cruelty alone. It was something worse. It was dismissal. Susan introduced herself calmly, unaware that the room had already made up its mind. She stood there not as a hopeful dreamer chasing fame, but as someone who had lived most of her life unseen, quietly believing her voice mattered even when the world told her otherwise. Then the music began. I Dreamed a Dream wasn't just a song choice. It was a confession. The first note shifted the energy in the room instantly. Smiles vanished. Laughter stopped. What replaced it was shock, then silence. Susan's voice didn't rise from training or polish alone. It rose from experience, disappointment, and years of holding onto something fragile. By the time she reached the final note, the transformation was complete. Faces that once mocked her now stared in disbelief. The judges weren't impressed. They were humbled. In less than 3 minutes, Susan Boyle shattered every expectation placed upon her. That performance became one of the most replayed moments in television history, not because it was perfect, but because it exposed how wrong people had been. What the audience didn't realize was that Susan's journey didn't begin on that stage. She had spent decades auditioning, being rejected, and performing in small spaces where recognition never came. She had sent recordings that were ignored. She had sung locally for years with no spotlight, no validation. That night didn't create her talent. It revealed how long it had been overlooked. When the audition clip went viral, reaching tens of millions of viewers within days, Susan's life changed instantly. The same world that had laughed moments earlier now demanded access to every part of her existence. There was no pause, no preparation, and no protection from the pressure that followed. As Susan advanced through the competition, the emotional weight grew heavier. Behind the scenes, the attention became overwhelming. Cameras followed her constantly. Headlines speculated about her mental health. Every word she spoke was analyzed. Paparazzi appeared everywhere. Susan wasn't built for spectacle. She was built for sincerity. The sudden loss of privacy began to take a toll. At one point, the pressure became so intense that she withdrew from public view, fearing she might collapse under expectations she never asked for. While audiences watched a confident performer on stage, few noticed the exhaustion and anxiety quietly consuming her off-camera. By the time Susan reached the finale, she had become more than a contestant. She was a symbol, a reminder that talent doesn't always look the way we expect. When she finished as runner-up to the dance group Diversity, reactions were divided. Some were disappointed. Others believed the outcome was fair. But for Susan, the result mattered less than endurance. She later admitted that walking away at that moment would have meant losing the one opportunity she had waited her entire life for. The night that brought her global fame also marked the beginning of a far more difficult chapter. After the show ended, there was no return to normal life. Susan was everywhere. Television appearances, interviews, global tour, and nonstop media coverage followed immediately. She became one of the most recognizable faces in the world almost overnight. Yet emotionally, she remained the same woman who had lived quietly in Blackburn, caring for memories of her parents and finding comfort in routine. The speed of fame became disorienting. Susan later described how she struggled to process the scale of what had happened. One moment she was anonymous. The next, she belonged to the world. Her debut album shattered records, becoming one of the best-selling releases of the year. From the outside, it looked like success layered upon success. But inside, Susan felt exposed. Every movement became news. Every expression was interpreted. She had spent most of her life invisible. Now she was watched so closely that she felt she no longer belonged to herself. The same media that praised her talent also dissected her behavior without compassion. The pressure reached a breaking point when she was hospitalized shortly after the competition, revealing cracks beneath the glossy narrative of overnight success. Paragraph 9. Despite everything, Susan didn't retreat. Signing with Simon Cowell's label secured her career, but it also locked her into an unforgiving pace. Tour, recordings, and promotions followed without pause. Saying no felt impossible after waiting decades to be heard. Still, Susan tried to stay grounded. With her first major earnings, she bought her childhood home instead of luxury properties. That house represented stability, memory, and safety. It was her anchor in a life that suddenly felt uncontrollable. For most of her life, Susan believed something about her was broken. Social situations overwhelmed her. Noise exhausted her. Change caused deep anxiety she couldn't explain. Fame intensified these struggles. In 2013, she finally received clarity when she was diagnosed with autism spectrum disorder. The diagnosis wasn't devastating. It was relieving. It explained a lifetime of misunderstanding. It gave her compassion for herself where the world had offered judgment. Fame hadn't created her challenges. It had exposed them. Susan also spoke openly about depression and emotional struggles that predated fame. These were not weaknesses. They were realities she had learned to manage quietly. The loss of routine and constant exposure made hiding impossible. Yet she remained fiercely protective of her private life. She avoided celebrity culture and returned home whenever possible. Her life stayed simple by design, not accident. Later, Susan revealed another battle. She was diagnosed with type 2 diabetes, forcing lifestyle changes that affected her health and routine. Weight loss followed, not for appearance but survival. Still, she continued performing, believing that stepping away would mean losing the one thing that had always made sense. When the pandemic arrived, tours were canceled and isolation returned, masking a deeper struggle that was quietly unfolding. In 2022, Susan suffered a stroke. The impact was terrifying. Her speech and singing were affected. Doctors warned her that returning to the stage might not be possible. For nearly a year, she worked privately through therapy and rehabilitation. She disappeared from public view, not by choice but necessity. Singing had always been her refuge. Losing it felt unbearable. When Susan returned to the Britain's Got Talent stage after her recovery, the moment carried deep emotional weight. Singing, "I Dreamed a Dream Again" wasn't nostalgia. It was survival. The performance wasn't about perfection. It was about reclaiming what she almost lost. The applause honored not just her voice, but her resilience. By 2025, Susan reappeared publicly with quiet confidence. Her appearance had changed, but more importantly, so had her presence. On her birthday, she returned to social media with gratitude, not drama. She spoke about determination, healing, and music. In May, she confirmed her return to the recording studio, reclaiming a piece of herself she refused to lose. Despite global fame, Susan's life remains simple. She still lives in her childhood home. She has never married and has no children. She has spoken honestly about loneliness, companionship, and acceptance. Success, to her, was never about wealth or attention. It was about singing without fear. Susan Boyle gave the world a moment it will never forget. But the years that followed were far more complex than applause suggested. Her story isn't just about talent. It's about survival, misunderstanding, and the cost of being seen too late. True success isn't always measured by recognition. Sometimes it's measured by peace, by returning to yourself after the noise fades. Paragraph 19. Susan's voice didn't just change her life. It challenged how the world listens. If her journey moved you, share your thoughts below, like this video, and subscribe for more untold stories behind the fame.